61-62 team. To fully understand the accomplishments of the Muskegon Zephyrs, we must start a few years previous to the 1961-62 season, when the estate of Lewis Carlisle Walker donated $1 million to build a multi-purpose arena in Muskegon. Then upon its completion, it was donated to the city of Muskegon in October of 1960. This finished gem, the L.C. Walker Arena, was an ideal venue for the International Hockey League, but it needed a team that was competitive to IHL standards. Word of this need reached the ears of Moose Lallo all the way out to New Haven, Connecticut. But Moose didn't have the $25,000 franchise fee. So he contacted his friend Gerry Glaude, who owned a coffee service business in New Haven. Gerry liked the idea of owning a hockey team, so he sold his coffee business and moved west to Muskegon to become the new owner of the Muskegon Zephyrs. Gerry and Moose had a short time frame of months to work with in order to put together a team. So they went to work, working long hours on the phone, contacting players from the Montreal area and many other hockey circles throughout Canada and the U.S. The team they put together was competitive, but went 2-12 for the first 14 games of 1960. The first-year team went on to have a strong second half of the season and finished second to the St. Paul Saints. The Zephyrs won their opening round series in that playoff, but were beaten 4-1 in the Turner Cup Finals by that same strong veteran St. Paul Saints. In 1961, the NHL was only comprised of 6 teams. Today, there are 30 teams in the NHL. What this means is that many of the players from the elite IHL minor league of the 1960s would easily have made the rosters of today's 30-team NHL league. That's how good that IHL league was back then. During the offseason, the Zephyrs fully realized that they had a competitive IHL team, but in order to challenge the dominant teams of the St. Paul Saints and the Minneapolis Millers, they needed to change a few things to even have the slightest chance of winning the Turner Cup trophy. The pieces came together by the start of 1961-62 season, but the chemistry of new players meshing with the veteran players from last year would take some time. DeLeese added some quick young legs to the team by making an agreement with the Detroit Red Wing general manager Jack Adams. The Red Wings could get their younger junior league players more experience by playing nearby in Muskegon for the Zephyrs. A great agreement. Welcome to the team, center Lyle Porter Jr. and another big young center from Edmonton, Larry Lund. The Zephyrs had 5 players trying out for the NHL teams during the training camp period. 4 of them came back and re-signed with the team: Jim McLeod, Joe Kastelic, Warren Beck, and Bryan McLay. Also during the offseason, the Zephyrs traded for Joe Kastelic of Fort Wayne. Joe was the 5th leading scorer in the IHL the previous year. Another addition was the little Frenchman, Claude Boucher, a strong winger from Three Rivers, Quebec, who had scored 120 goals in the Quebec League. Then the final touch happened when Ken Hayden, who led the IHL in goals scored the previous season, decided to come back for one more season and inked a contract with the Zephyrs. Yes, folks, all the pieces had been put in place. The team just needed to come together and believe. The Zephyrs would start the 61-62 season led by player coach Moose Lallo, along with captain defenseman Gerry Glaude. The roster was set with the current IHL roster limit of 13 players, and the team was fully aware of who stood in the way of a championship. The Minneapolis Millers, whom they never beat the previous year, and the St. Paul Saints, who they had beaten twice, and they were the defending Turner Cup champions. The Zephyrs played much better to start the second season, an 18-12 record for the first 30 games compared to a 9-18 start the previous season. The good start kept the Zephyrs in the top 4 places in the standings, well within range of the 2 teams from Minnesota. At this point, Muskegon had 6 players tied for the leading team scoring with 18 points, and a 7th player only 1 point behind at 17. Balanced scoring is hard to defend. But the frustration set in during mid-November. The schedule called for the Zephyrs to take their first Western road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, and also to the 2 teams in Minnesota. The team could not muster up a win at these 3 Western arenas, and everything came to a head on November 15th in St. Paul. According to Hall of Famer Jimmy Henderson, who was a Muskegon Zephyr beat writer for the Chronicle, one of Muskegon's star players, Bryan McLay, received a high sticking penalty and was instructed to go to the sin bin to sit out the 2-minute penalty. A Minneapolis police officer was in charge of the penalty box, and McLay refused to sit when the officer told him to. So the officer grabbed onto Bryan, drew his nightstick, and started swinging it at McLay. Bryan kept warding off the many blows with his padded gloves, but instantly the Muskegon team jumped from its box across the ice and entered the fray with the officer. Well, more officers joined in, and when order was restored, the initial officer received a gash that needed 5 stitches to close. The Minnesota view was that the officer was struck by a Muskegon Zephyr hockey stick. But the Muskegon view was that an officer was hit by another officer swinging his nightstick at the players. So we had 2 separate views, but 3 months later in a Minneapolis municipal court, everything was sorted out. McLay and Stevenson received additional fines, and it was Stevenson's hockey stick that accidentally clouded the officer over the head. Many believe it was that night in St. Paul when the Zephyrs bonded and came together as a team. The friendly confines of the Walk Arena was just what the Zephyrs needed after that tough western road trip. Muskegon went on a 10-game winning streak to set a new team record, starting with a win on November 25th against Indianapolis and lasting until mid-January. The offense was red hot, setting a new team game scoring record with a 13-2 win over Fort Wayne on January 14th. Bryan McLay and Joe Kastelic both had hat tricks in that game. But there was one small minor note from Jimmy Henderson on this record game. Fort Wayne goalie Reno Zanger was injured with 2:30 left in the first period. So the Comets inserted their trainer, Harold Ellis, who finished the game as their goalie, and he gave up 9 of those 13 goals that they set the record. Just a minor note from Jimmy Henderson. The consistent Zephyrs continue to rack up the wins, winning 18 of the next 20 games. There were 3 teams battling for first place all the way until the last weekend of the season: St. Paul, Minneapolis, and our Muskegon Zephyrs. This was the closest regular season race ever in the IHL's 17-year history. All 3 teams were within 1 point of each other heading into the last weekend of the games, and Muskegon could clinch the regular season by winning their last 3 games. Well, the Zephyrs did it in style, scoring 33 goals during those 3 games, clinching the regular season title and the Huber Trophy. For the regular season, Muskegon set IHL team records in assists with 568, points at 902. A couple of IHL individual records were set by defenseman Gerry Glaude. His 86 points were the most by a defenseman in a season, and 68 assists were also the most by a defenseman. And Joe Kastelic tied an IHL record for scoring 6 goals in 1 game. He also was voted the league MVP by the season press. The Zephyrs were ready for the playoffs. Their potent, balanced scoring attack was led by 5 players who were within 11 points of each other: Kastelic, McLay, Back, Conrad, and Hayden. Muskegon played the Minneapolis Millers in the opening round of the playoffs, quickly dispatching them 4-1. This set up a championship round for the Turner Cup against the defending champion, the St. Paul Saints. In Game 1, Muskegon was down 5-2 after 2 periods, but came roaring back with 4 goals in the 3rd period, sending the game into overtime 6-6. Then Joe Kastelic lit up the red light with a goal in the 2nd overtime, and the Zephyrs had won Game 1 7-6. In Game 2, Captain Gerry Glaude had a 3-goal hat trick to lead the Zephyrs to a 7-4 win. The Zephyrs traveled to St. Paul for Game 3. Ron Stevenson scored the first 2 goals of the game in the 1st period, then added an assist to lead the Zephyrs to a 5-2 win and a 3-0 lead in the series. St. Paul's backs were to the wall, and they played a strong Game 4. It was tied 1-1 after 3 periods. Then at the start of the 2nd overtime, Gerry Glaude passed the puck to Warren Back at center ice. Then Back fed Bryan McLay as he broke across the blue line. McLay took 2 strides and fired a low skimmer from 45 feet out that took a jump over the goalie's stick and into the net. Only 50 seconds into the 2nd overtime, and the Zephyrs were the 1962 Turner Cup champions. McLay scored both Zephyr goals, while Jim McLeod had 53 saves during that game. Here tonight to say a few words on behalf of the team is the man who started playing organized hockey in Medicine Hat, Alberta, but is better known as the Zephyrs' #1 center between Joe Kastelic and Bryan McLay. It's a privilege to introduce Mr. Warren Beck.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Hall of Fame committee, and obviously by the number of people who are here, you recognize the value of what the Hall of Fame committee has done for your community. A lot of us don't live in the area anymore, but you've got an asset here with this group of volunteers that can never be duplicated. They do an absolutely marvelous job, and thank you ever so much for inviting us to be part of your Hall of Fame. And I want to